This program is made possible by the support of Delta Dental, Quick Trip, Marshfield Clinic Health System, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Hospital Association. Watch Wisconsin Eye on Spectrum Channels 995 and 300. This program is made possible by the support of Delta Dental, Quick Trip, Marshfield Clinic Health System, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Hospital Association. Watch Wisconsin Eye on Spectrum Channels 995 and 363 and at wisi.org.
Read it to the Wisconsin Elections Commission. Give us just a couple more minutes to get let people get in before Meagan gets started. Well, it is 1 o'clock, and so just to let you know that I will send out a link to the video from this after the availability, as soon as Zoom makes it available. So if you want to go ahead, Meagan.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Reed, and thanks everyone as always for being here. Much appreciated, as these last few weeks speed up towards the election. I know that you all have a lot of important things to cover, so really appreciate all your continued engagement and a lot of the great stories and information that we've been seeing out there. So thank you as always for your hard work during this election season. So a couple of quick updates and then we'll open it up for questions. The first is an update on poll workers. So Wisconsin cities, towns, and villages are still reporting to us daily their critical and serious needs for poll workers. And we're still at about 200. That number changes every day. And it's always posted on the MyVote website. So if you go to myvote.wi.gov and look at Become a Poll Worker, you'll see a list of those jurisdictions that are still reporting a need for poll workers. Again, that's going to continue to change daily, right? So as people report that they are able to serve or they're no longer able to serve, there's going to be new communities added to the list, communities removed from that list on a daily basis. There aren't numbers associated with those needs, but those are communities that are saying that they have a shortage of poll workers. And once they no longer do, they'll be removed from that list. Or if something changes in a jurisdiction, that jurisdiction will be added to that list. And we try to keep up with those as soon as we get new information from our local election officials. But thank you to the Wisconsinites who have stepped up to serve as poll workers. We continue to see that we're in much better shape when it comes to poll workers than we saw in previous elections. And so I think that's great and a real testament to our Wisconsinites' willingness to serve their communities as poll workers. So thanks for everyone that has already volunteered and for those that will continue to look at that list and to sign up to become poll workers. Absentee voting. So as of this morning, to give you an update on our absentee ballots, so currently there are 1.57 million absentee ballots that have been requested, about 1.56 million that have been sent. And then we're at 1,130,940. So that was 1,130,940 that have been returned. And the return number now includes about 149,856 in-person absentee ballots. So Tuesday was the first day of in-person absentee voting in clerk's offices or in designated sites around the state. On Tuesday, there were 79,774 in-person absentee ballots recorded as voted. On Wednesday, there were 70,082 that were recorded. So while we'll get that data on a daily basis, you'll continue to see that data for both by mail absentees and in-person absentees posted on elections.wi.gov daily. It should be noted that especially for some of those in-person absentee ballots that are cast, that there is a lag in that data. Not all clerks are required to use the statewide system directly to issue those in-person absentee ballots. So for some of them, it'll take a day or two for them or for someone that provides database services to enter that number into the statewide database as well. But you will find those updates every morning on our website. Another point I wanted to touch on is that yesterday, the FBI and the Director of National Intelligence announced that foreign actors are trying to confuse voters in the United States and to sow doubt about the election process through emails to voters. Now, there's no evidence that Wisconsin's or any state systems have been accessed or compromised in any way. Any data that was used to make these email contacts is publicly available. This is not data that came from statewide databases. So yesterday's announcement, I think the most important thing is it serves as a reminder to all of us as we head into the election, and that is to seek out trusted sources of election information. And again, that's your state or your local election official. This is not a new message. This is something that we've been talking about all year. There are groups that are trying to confuse and mislead voters, to sow doubt about the process. And we all have a duty to check our facts and to stop the spread of mis and disinformation. If you see something suspicious, something that doesn't make sense as a voter, you have the responsibility to fact check it, to check your voter record, to seek out legitimate information from your election official, and to not perpetuate misinformation. Our technological systems in Wisconsin are secure, they are ready. We've been preparing for, assessing, protecting, adjusting our technology to keep pace for the last 4 years. So please, to voters, I think this is a very important reminder, do not help rumors spread. Learn the facts about elections. And there's some great places to start. The first is going to myvote.wi.gov. That's where you can learn about the mechanics of elections, where you can check your voter record and make sure that everything is up to date, and make sure that you know how to participate in the process. And then another great resource is elections.wi.gov/2020. And that's where you can find information about how the state of Wisconsin protects our technology. Again, this is something that has been front and center in elections for the last 4 years. And there's a long, comprehensive list of all the many things that go in to protecting Wisconsin's election technology. The next thing I wanted to touch on was some physical security, polling place security information. So as we've been talking about, we are going to be posting some additional information for our local election officials that really lays out some groundwork, framework for local election officials to have discussions with their legal counsel and their local law enforcement about how physical security is approached in their community, how it's noticed at their polling places. So we're election administrators. We're not experts in Wisconsin firearm law or other things that are in the field of law enforcement. But in general, I think it's important for our local election officials to know what questions to ask when they're engaging with their local law enforcement, when they're working with their municipal council on how to notice buildings, how to notice polling places, and notify property owners. I think those are all things within municipal jurisdictions that will be providing them some additional framework for having those discussions. So there's really a no one size fits all, but we can certainly give them some guidance as they're having those discussions with their local law enforcement. I would also point out that any of this guidance that will be posted is building off of current contingency planning that all of our local election officials are already doing. So in addition to cybersecurity being front and center over the last 4 years, so has contingency planning. It really has been at the core of all the training we do with our local election officials. And many of these things are building on those discussions and those response plans that they already have in place in all of Wisconsin's local election offices and polling places as well. So I think that covers all of the points I wanted to quickly touch on. And I would welcome any questions that you might have.
Right. So you just raise your hands, and if you want to ask a question, first is Scott Bauer.
Hey,
You're always first, Scott.
Yeah. Thanks again for doing this call. I actually came on a couple seconds late, so I want to loop back to the poll worker shortage or need. I just did a quick count, and it looks like there were 70 communities. And that's up from where we were a week ago. Did you say you had a count on how many they needed, or you don't have a count, and how comfortable or not are you with where we are today?
Right. So the number continues to change daily. So we don't have a count of specifically the number of poll workers needed in each of those communities. So while the number of communities may have changed, the number of poll workers stays about the same, it looks like, from what we're being reported to by the local election officials. So we're still seeing around a need for 200 poll workers statewide. But again, some of those communities are very small communities, so they might have a need for 1 or 2 poll workers, but that certainly represents a large percentage of their poll workers in those communities. So the list of communities is going to change every day. The need is going to change every day, but I continue to feel good about where we're at in terms of addressing those needs. I think it's encouraging to see that list is changing so that people see those needs and they're able to contact those local election officials and become poll workers. And so I think that's very encouraging. But we're also going to continue to work our other channels and with our other partners to make sure that if there is an emergency need on election day, that there's also resources that those jurisdictions can turn to.
Next is Emily Davies.
Thank you for holding this. My question is actually something that I'm looking forward to doing a story next week on, but figured I'd get you now. Related to voters who are hospitalized within the 7 days before election. Are you anticipating that will be an increase this year with our surge in cases here? And just talk to me a little bit about how that works.
Sure. So like you said, the hospitalized elector process is something available to voters who are hospitalized in the 7 days around and on election day. And the commission did vote earlier this year to extend that qualification to voters that are also quarantined as well. We did not see a significant increase in the usage of that provision in other elections this year, but it remains an option that's available to those voters that cannot leave to be able to participate on election day, and if the deadlines to receive your absentee have already passed. So the process works like this. So first, the voter has to designate an agent, and this can be someone of their choosing. And what the agent is going to do is they're going to bring the application for an absentee ballot along with the voter's photo ID to the municipal clerk's office. And then they're going to give the clerk that application material. The agent is also going to have to show their photo ID to prove that they are the agent that's been appointed by the voter. The voter actually makes that distinction on the application. The clerk will then give the agent the ballot to bring to the hospitalized elector. The hospitalized elector will cast their ballot in the presence of a witness. The elector and the witness will sign the certificate, and then the agent can return that ballot to the municipal clerk or to the voter's polling place if it's election day, or if there were enough time or if they felt comfortable, they could return it to a drop box or by mail as well. But it really, the hospitalized elector process and the sequestered juror process are really the only two processes where somebody else can deliver a ballot to a voter. And that has to be, again, to a voter who's in a hospital or a care facility where they're unable to leave because of their medical condition, or if they are quarantined under doctor's orders and are unable to leave for that reason.
Next is Laurel White.
Hi there. Thanks.
Oops. Sorry, Laurel, I accidentally muted you.
Oh, that's okay. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
You're unmuted now.
Okay. So I wanted to ask about mask wearing at the polls. I know you issued a memo about this in July. So I just kind of wanted to follow up and see if there was anything that has changed since that point. Obviously, a lot of movement and public health over the last several months. So is it still the commission's position that election officials can require poll workers to wear masks and election observers to wear masks?
Yes, that's correct. For poll workers and for observers, they can be required to wear masks in those roles. But voters cannot be required to wear masks because you can't add any additional qualifications to voting. So the guidance that was issued prior to August still stands. It's still the relevant guidance as we head into November.
Great, thank you.
Next is Mark Nicat. I think you need to unmute.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Ken.
Great. I'm just wondering, do you have any kind of estimate of how long it's going to take jurisdictions to count all of their absentee ballots? And will there be any kind of reporting on election night of the number of outstanding ballots yet to be counted?
Sure. So, election night reporting, that's always something where there's never an aggregate statewide on election night. So what the law says, and we actually just posted a very comprehensive memo on the timelines and what the statutes require for election night reporting. And the first is at the municipal level. So at the municipal level, there's no deadline per se for counting ballots, right? They have to count every ballot that's received and eligible to be counted, and they continue that process until it's completed. Once that process is completed, they then have 2 hours to get those unofficial results to their county, and the county then posts the unofficial results by reporting unit on the county website. And then the state's role by statute, and again, this is all by statute, these are not policy decisions. The statute says that the Elections Commission maintains a list of those county websites. So there's never an aggregate of unofficial results on election night. Any aggregate actually happens through the media, historically through the Associated Press. It's not something that, there's not a list of unofficial election night results from Wisconsin. There are those county links, and then each county does host the returns from each individual reporting unit. Another requirement for some of our jurisdictions that are central count jurisdictions. So the majority of our municipalities operate where absentee ballots are processed at the voter's polling place. So absentees are sent to each individual polling place. They're counted at that polling place along with in-person ballots at that polling site on election day. And so then when they're posted on the county's websites, those polling place results contain both in-person absentees, both absentees and in-person votes. Now for central count jurisdictions, all those results are going to come in from the polling place for the in-person votes that are cast on election day, but they're not going to include central count, where all the absentees are processed at a central count facility. So the law says that each of those municipalities at 8 p.m. on election night are required to post on the municipal websites a statement that says how many absentees they have received by that day to be counted, so that you know what is the potential number of absentee ballots that are going to be added to those polling place totals to create the unofficial set. Now the counties don't have that same requirement to post the central count outstanding absentees along with the polling place totals, but the commission did just pass guidance at this Tuesday's meeting that gave suggested language to those counties to post on their websites along with the polling place totals information about central count and where to find the number of outstanding absentees for any given reporting unit. So I know that's a long explanation, but that is how it works in the state of Wisconsin. Each level of government is given a role on election night, and there is no role for actually aggregating those totals. The certification process, which happens after election day, once all those ballots have been tallied, that involves the municipal level, the county level, and then the state analyzing and certifying the unofficial election results and making them official. And that usually takes about a month to complete that process. So I don't have an estimate on how long it's going to take those 1,850 jurisdictions to complete that counting process to create their unofficial result set. But we have emphasized to all of them that communication is essential to make sure that they're communicating before election day to let the press and the public know exactly how that process is going to work, to provide them information or status updates. And then also to be very clear when they're posting those unofficial results, what everyone's looking at. Are you looking at central count returns? Are you looking at the polling place returns that don't include the absentees? So I think communication is really essential coming from each of those jurisdictions and then from our counties as well, because they're the ones that are going to house that data on election night.
All right, next is Abigail Becker.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Great, thanks for having this. So my question is actually related to the one you just answered, but I'll ask it anyway to see what other parts you can address. So how will the influx of absentee ballots affect the publication of election results? And then how do different localities' counting procedures kind of factor into the timing? So you sort of got to that second half there, but if you could address the rest, that'd be great.
Sure. So I think the increased number of absentee ballots means that on election day, our polling places are really doing double duty because they can't start opening and tallying those absentee ballots until polls open on election day. So counting absentees, just like election day, is a publicly observable process. So it can only happen at the polls or at central count on election day, where observers can be a part of that process. And so because of the increased number of absentees and the number of people that are still remaining that we expect to vote on election day in person, they're going to be busy doing both. And so in many ways, our communities need more poll workers than they have before, because they're going to, in most places, have absentee processors working on that part all day. It used to be something where the poll workers were able to fit it in when there were maybe gaps in the day where there was a lull. And so now they're going to have to try to do both jobs in the same amount of time, using the same amount of equipment in many of these places as well. And so, you know, it's a lot that has to happen. The statutes outline a process for how those absentees are reviewed and how the decision is made to tabulate each one, to recognize if there's any deficiency on the certificate, if a ballot needs to be remade. And so our local election officials have been preparing for this volume and to be able to have the resources needed to adjust to it. But, you know, again, the statutes say that the ballots have to be counted. There's no cutoff for that. So they're going to continue to operate under the same standards that they have in the past, which is accuracy over speed. It's our job as election officials to make sure that the tally is accurate. And so that's what they're going to continue to do. And it may take additional time because there are additional ballots that need to be counted, and they need to be providing that same service to the voters at the polls on election day. So double the amount of work, same amount of time. So it may take a little bit longer, but our communities are adding resources to the process to make sure that they're able to do that as efficiently as possible.
All right, next is Key Murray, K.I. Murray.
Hi, Megan. Thank you guys for holding this. My question is on election security. Can you kind of just break down how the statewide ballot counting system works and then the safeguards that are in place to keep that secure?
Thanks for the question. So there is no statewide ballot counting system. We have a statewide voter registration system. That's the system where each voter, when they register to vote, the local election official gets that application material, they review it, they then enter a voter into the system. It's where if a voter sends in their absentee application, the clerk first looks up their record to make sure they're a lawfully registered voter. They can then process an absentee application. It's where they can do things like print the labels for the absentee ballot, but ultimately every single ballot that's issued, so all 1.4 million plus ballots that have been issued by mail, the statewide system is where those clerks go in and they make those determinations and where they track all of that information. So that's the statewide database. Tabulation happens on a completely separate system that's run by each municipality. So the law says that for municipalities that have, I believe, a population over 5,000, they're required to use electronic tabulation equipment. And so most of our municipalities, and they get to choose what equipment to use as long as it's certified by the federal government and by the state. And so we have a very diverse offering of tabulation equipment in the state of Wisconsin because we're so decentralized. And so that tabulation equipment is used again to offer efficiency and accuracy in the tabulation process, but we're also required to have a paper ballot, a verifiable paper ballot for every single ballot that's cast in the state of Wisconsin. And so that means in the event that there is any kind of a question about the process, there's always that paper artifact to go back to. And on election night, those results again are completely unofficial that go from the polling place to the county to be posted on the website. There are then 3 levels of checks on the system at the municipal, county, and state level before we actually certify the winner of a contest. And that usually doesn't happen for almost a month after the election. So for the presidential, the certification will happen at the commission meeting on December 1st. And so those are all things that have to happen before we ever have an official winner of any election or of any contest. Another thing that happens during that process of certification is the post-election voting equipment audit. So we randomly select 5% of the voting equipment in use in the states, and they have to do what amounts to a hand recount of that reporting unit to make sure that the paper ballots match the total of the voting equipment. We've never had a discrepancy before, and we continue to increase the number of sample sizes that we have around the state. And so those are, again, randomly selected and part of that certification process to make sure that there was nothing that went wrong as part of that tabulation. But the tabulation equipment and the statewide voter registration database, those are two things that aren't connected in any way, shape, or form. They're completely separate systems and part of the process.
Next is Brett Lemoyne.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you put the number of absentee ballots and early in-person voting numbers into historical context for us? In other words, in past presidential elections, just 12 days before the election, how did today's numbers stack up?
So Reed might have to help me out a little bit on this one, but I believe in 2016, we had a total of 200,000 ballots issued absentee by mail. And that's in contrast to 1.4 plus million that have been issued absentee by mail for this election. So historically, our state was about 6% absentee voting by mail. And now we've seen in our April election, we were over 60% absentee voting by mail. And in our August statewide election, that number was actually over 80% that participated absentee by mail. So I don't know how so far our in-person absentee varies. It's apples to oranges, really, because this is the first big election where the court decisions have reverted back to the statutory norm, which is that in-person absentee can only be held during the 14 days before the election. Prior to this, for our other big elections, each jurisdiction was able to set when they started in-person absentee and set those hours. So there was no one big start day for in-person absentee. So it's kind of hard to gauge or compare those. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Reed. So
In November of 2016, we had just over 3 million ballots cast total. Of those, 819,316 were absentee ballots. And then breaking that down, there was about 674,000 that were absentee in person and 144,802 that were absentee by mail. What I've been telling people is that basically throw out all the old records. There's nothing that compares to what's going on now. So next is Nick Bohr. Nick, you got to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Quick question about, we keep talking about how long it may take to count ballots in certain places because of the absentees. Is there concern about fatigue or doing all-nighters, or how do you keep people from being exhausted and making mistakes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, this is not new to election officials. We always have long nights. I can't think of a single election where I've ever been off of phone duties before the turn into the next day. So I don't think long nights are anything new for election officials. That being said, a lot of our jurisdictions are planning accordingly with things like shifts to make sure that they have coverage. The law does say that the local election offices, when they're tabulating those absentee ballots, they don't have an opportunity to adjourn and reconvene. So they have to continue counting until the counting is completed. And so many of the jurisdictions have, again, staffed up to make sure that if they do have to work in shifts, that they're able to do so to make sure that that process can continue.
All right, next is Ellie Kaufman.
Hi, Megan. Thanks so much for doing this call. I have two quick questions for you. So at what point when do you decide that there aren't enough poll workers and you're not going to have enough and you need to reach out to state agencies or the National Guard to fill that need? How soon before Election Day?
So we've already done that. So we've been working with our state partners to make sure that they have that same information so that we can engage and work with them to set up the framework in the event that they're needed. So we've had these conversations with leadership in the state governments to utilize state employees in the event that there's a shortage in an area where willing state employees live and are able to serve. We've also had these conversations with our partners, including the National Guard, so that if or when they receive the orders, that they're able to assist in those emergency capacities, that the framework is all in place. So we're talking to them constantly. I mean, we talk to our state partners about poll worker shortages, about all other needs on a daily basis. We're constantly doing things like sending out supplies, utilizing their assistance, and making sure all of our polling places have what they need. So those conversations are happening every day. And if we do receive the official word that they're able to help support us, we have all of the pieces in place and ready to go once or if those orders are received.
Okay, so I guess my follow-up is, at what point do you make the call that you need National Guard to help fill the poll worker need?
Oh, thank you for clarifying. We can't make that call. So only the governor can make that call about if the National Guard is able to be utilized as poll workers. So we provide the information so that they can make the decision, but we're not the decision makers. We don't have the power or authority to be able to create the orders ourselves.
That makes sense. Thank you. Okay, one more question. I know you said that Wisconsin systems were not compromised in relation to the FBI announcement last night, but did your office receive any reports of voters getting that intimidating letter or email similar to what was reported in Florida or Alaska?
We did not have any reports of that contact. We've certainly had many voters contact us this year saying that they've received text messages that they found text messages or emails or calls that they found confusing, or that they didn't appreciate, certainly, but not those specific ones that were cited. But again, our message, regardless if it's that text message that people received, regardless of attribution to who might be sending it, we continue to reinforce the message that voters should go to the legitimate source of information. I know I myself get confusing mailings every day that say I haven't returned my ballot or I'm not registered to vote. And I basically tell voters to ignore that noise. Ignore the noise. There is a lot of noise out there, and go right to the source and get the official information from your election official. Anything else that you receive, they might not be operating under good data. They might not be doing it with malice, but they might not have good data. It's certainly not the official data. So they should go right to the source and ignore the rest of the noise.
Thank you.
Next is Victor Jacobo.
Hi, Meagan. Thank you again for taking the call. That last question kind of was along the same lines of what I was going to ask. Essentially, outside of this particular case of what came out yesterday, of that kind of contact with voters, have there been any other attempts or reports that WEC has received regarding potential disinformation campaigns, outside of what we heard yesterday that may be affecting voters?
Every day we get calls and emails from voters that, are complaining that they're getting contacts that are confusing. Like I said, I've received, we probably all have, mailers, text messages that say things like, you need to register to vote, or you need to return your absentee ballot, when we've already done that. And so there's an incredible amount of noise. Now, whether or not those people are engaged in just misinformation because they're trying to be helpful, but they're not getting it right, or if it's disinformation and it actually has malice behind it, we don't know that. That's for the intelligence community to sort out that attribution. But there certainly is a great deal of noise and inaccurate information floating out there. And so again, just reinforcing the voters to go to the official source and to ignore the rest of the noise. Go to the official source. And if something doesn't seem right, let us know and we can help you get the correct information.
Thank you.
All right, next is Cheyenne Hazlett.
Hi, thanks for doing this. My question is whether you're able to track through the intelligent barcodes that you guys have started using this year, how many voters who have been sent ballots have actually received them at this point with 2 weeks to go, since we know that we're sort of passing that time frame when it's safe for voters to continue mailing ballots back or else opting for a drop box?
Yeah, we certainly do have that data. I don't have a specific number if there were undeliverables, but if there are undeliverables, that's for, again, each of the municipal clerks. When they get that back, they have to follow the process to contact that voter to make sure they still live there before they can issue another ballot. But we run regular queries on our data. Data quality and the team that works on that in our office is really incredible in looking at those reports every day to make sure that nothing is anomalous, that we're not seeing a batch of ballots or an area that has not yet received their ballots. And we have not seen any trends or anomalies that raised a red flag. But for those individual cases where a ballot is returned undeliverable to a clerk's office, the clerks have a process that they have to follow to make sure that the voter still lives there, and if the voter is eligible, to reissue that ballot. But we haven't seen anything larger scale.
Mm-hmm. So no delays in voters getting their ballots like we've seen in some other states?
Not that I'm aware of in terms of, a trend or an area where there's a delay in ballots being delivered.
Next is Patrick Marley.
Hi, thanks for doing this as always. I wanted to touch on a couple topics. One is, we were talking before about getting the results on election night or the next morning. Do you know of any communities, or is it your understanding that communities in general are doing what they usually do, which is report results as they tally them? Or are there some that might hold them back until they have all of their unofficial results before posting them?
Well, for municipalities that don't use central count, the law says that they have to wait to post the results from a reporting unit until the whole reporting unit is complete. So they can't, post Ward 5 when it's 50% returns are in. That's not something that they're allowed to do in those jurisdictions. So I'm not aware of anybody that's changing their process. I hope, if anything, that you'll see an improvement in communication. I think it's probably important for all of you, and we've been encouraging our local election officials to engage before Election Day so that we all understand what we're seeing. How are they going to post those returns? What is that report going to look like? In some large jurisdictions, again, that use central count, when you see the reporting units that have been returned, it might say, Ward 5, 100% returned. Well, that's just the polling place results. That doesn't include those absentees that are centrally counted that will be added to that reporting unit later. And so I think communication on both sides is really essential so that we all understand what we're looking at and can give voters the correct information, because there is no aggregate. There is no place we can turn to and say, here's the unofficial winner of tonight's contest. There isn't that database. There isn't that requirement in statute. And so it really is looking at each of those individual reporting units and up to the media to report on those things responsibly.
Okay, and then for central count, can they report partial results at at the halfway point? Can they say, we've all these ballots from all these different precincts, we've got half of them done, and here's what they are so far? Or do they need to wait until they have all of the absentees before they publish those?
So I believe they have to have all the absentees done before they can publish that. And I think that more than that is a construct of statute. It's a construct of how the election management systems work. And how those result sets are created. So in those places, they're going to have, high-speed tabulators that are tabulating all of the ballots from all of the various wards in that jurisdiction. And then it creates one result set for central count that they're able to add in then to those totals. But again, I think that can vary by jurisdiction. I don't want to present myself as an expert on exactly what each of their reports will look like or how each of their election management software or tabulators work. But I believe that they're going to be all of the central count at once. I'm not aware of anybody that's able to give partial central count results. Now, if they could give an idea of how many ballots they've processed and how many are left, they may be able to do that, but it's not a requirement or something that they have to do.
Okay, and I'm definitely not an expert on this. This is an area that I'm not very familiar with, but my understanding is Milwaukee thinks there may be a way that they could give partial results from central count along the way. If they were technologically able to do that? Do they have that ability, or would they need the approval of the commission, or is there anything in statute that would prohibit them from doing that?
There's no prohibition on that, but I think there's a potential for confusion if they do change that process and if they do potential results. So there's no prohibition, but we've certainly in the commission did agree with this, and we will be including in our guidance that communication on this is key. So if a central count jurisdiction is doing that, and let's say they completed the tally for the first 5 reporting units at central count, and they added those to the totals from the polling places, they need to communicate that. So they would need to communicate that on the county's website, on the municipal website, to make sure that people know what they're looking at. But again, none of these are requirements that are outlined in the statute, but certainly best practices.
And then on another topic, we had this issue with out-of-gaming counties ballots, had that misprint on the timing marks. And my understanding is that printer is used by other communities as well. Have there been any indications that this may be affecting other areas? Have you checked that?
Yeah, we have checked that, and there's no indicator either from the vendor or from the other counties that this is an issue that's impacting them. So they all have to go through their pre-election testing of their voting equipment. So they do a logic and accuracy test of their voting equipment. They also do tests as part of the proofing process for their ballots often. And so we have engaged with the counties that also use that vendor, and they've all done those tests, and none of them have any reason to believe that there's any issues with their ballots or the ability for their optical scan equipment to utilize those ballots.
Got it. And then there is the ability of voters to cure their absentee ballots if they have an error. Is there data available on that as to how many ballots, have come in without a witness signature or some other defect, and how many of them have been, the voter's been alerted and they've cured it?
Yeah, so that's a little tricky. There is data available, but it's going to be incomplete. So when a voter returns their absentee ballot, the clerk is not required by law to flag if there's a deficiency. Most of them do. Most of them will mark in the system that there's a deficiency with a certificate, and that triggers a process to alert the voter. Some clerks will send them a letter, give them a call, send them an email and let them know, but we're also able to display that information if the clerk is tracking it in My Vote. So if a voter goes in and tracks their ballot, if they see an orange box in their ballot tracker, this could either mean that there was a problem with their absentee application, like they didn't provide a photo ID, or it could mean that there's a problem with their certificate on their absentee ballot envelope. Either the voter didn't sign, or the witness didn't sign, or was missing their address. And it tells the voter to contact their clerk for more information and to cure that. So it's not a requirement, but it is something that for those clerks that are tracking that would be available through the absentee data subscription report.
Thank you very much.
All right, next is Adam Brewster.
Thanks, Megan, for doing this. I have a couple of questions on a couple of topics. You touched briefly on, you guys aren't a law enforcement agency, but we've seen some, reporting this week about the different rules jurisdictions have about weapons that can be brought to polling places, and some local sheriffs have talked about that there's been communication about potential, militia group activity. Have you or the Election Commission been briefed on any threats or potential threats of those nature that could happen on Election Day or any of these early voting days?
We have not been briefed on any threats specific to polling places or in-person voting. However, we have had many conversations with state, federal, local law enforcement about planning, for contingency planning, of knowing what we would do, what local law enforcement would do in the event of an emergency at a polling place. And so again, these are not new conversations. Our local election officials have had contingency plans that factor in physical security for years. It's been part of our tabletop exercise program, where hundreds, probably almost all of our local election officials have gone through a scenario-based training where we practice cybersecurity events and how we would respond. We practice natural disasters, and we also practice physical threats at the polling place as well and how we would respond. And so as part of those exercises, as part of things like our grant to our local jurisdictions, they're required to complete these contingency plans, to plan for these possibilities and to know how they'll communicate and engage with their local law enforcement. So it's something that we've been having continual conversations about, not just recently, but for the last few years, to make sure that our local election officials are prepared to deal with any events that could happen at the polls on election day.
And then on the issue of during the meeting on Tuesday, is it when the commission gave guidance about county reporting and outstanding absentee ballots? My understanding is that cities themselves, so the city of Milwaukee has to say how many absentee ballots are at their central count facility. And does Milwaukee County or any of the counties that have central count jurisdictions, are you guys requiring them to have the total by county, or is it you're urging them to and it's guidance, but the cities themselves have to and it's optional for the counties? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, no, I think you're on the right track. And thanks for asking that question, because it is confusing and very pertinent to all of you. So the law says that central count jurisdictions, they are required, it's written in statute, they're required to post the number of absentee ballots that they've received by 8 p.m. on election day on their website. So on the municipal websites, and we have about 39 jurisdictions that utilize central count. We have a list of them on our website. They're required on election night by 8 p.m. to post the number of absentee ballots that they've received to be counted. And so this is supposed to be, so people know, okay, you're going to see the totals from the polling place, but there's still this many absentees that have to be added to those totals. So that's a requirement for just the municipalities and central count jurisdictions. What the commission did is they suggested to the counties. Now, this isn't a statutory requirement, so we can't make them do this, but we certainly think it's a best practice. That when the counties who are required to post the reporting unit unofficial totals on the county website, when they do that, we suggest that they also put language on there about their central count jurisdictions. So if it's Milwaukee, they would say, in Milwaukee County, we have these jurisdictions that utilize central count. Here's what that means. That means that what you're looking at is just the totals from the polling place. They still have absentees. And here's the numbers, or here's the links to how many absentees those jurisdictions had that still have to be added to these totals that you're seeing from the polling places. So it's a very strong suggestion, but it's not a statutory requirement. So we will have a statement that we suggest that those counties use on their websites where they're posting those polling place unofficial totals.
And just real quick on the timing of that, is that at 8:00 p.m. Central Time is when they have to post the number of absentees, or is that shortly after 8:00 they have to post the number of absentee ballots they've received? Like, should we be looking at the city of Milwaukee at 8:01 and expecting to see a number knowing that it might increase slightly? Or, is it like by 8:30, everyone has to have the total number they've received?
The statutes say, and I should have them in front of me, but I don't. I believe it says at the close of polls. So some places, the close of polls, if there's people still standing in line at 8, might be after 8. But the thought is that when you get an absentee ballot back, so the municipality, when they get absentee ballots back, they have to track that they have to track that they've received that absentee ballot back. So they're going to record that in the WISVote system as received. They're going to send it down to central count to be counted. And so that number that they have in the statewide system of absentees that were returned by 8 p.m. is the number that they're going to be posting on the website. So there could be a delay. Yeah, I think it's fair to say there could be a delay because not all polling places are going to close at 8 p.m. on the dot. And they might still have some of those absentees that came into the central count facility at 7:59 that they're still entering into the system to get that final number.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have one written question from Chuck Kornbach. What's your assessment of voting accessibility for this fall for people with disabilities? And your answer, could you please address the apparent lack of ADA compliant absentee ballots? Thanks.
Sure. So each polling place is required to have accessible voting equipment. So the requirements are laid out in law in terms of, each of those jurisdictions having to have accessible equipment. One of the things that'll be different this year than we had planned on is the audit program. Now, the audit program doesn't really help us address accessibility concerns at the polls that actual day. We will still have our staff available and clerks available to address those things that happen in real time. So if somebody calls with a complaint, we actually have a new process, not a new process, but a new way to contact us specifically about accessibility concerns on our website so that we can help voters and clerks and poll workers work through those in real time if somebody is having an issue at the polling place. That's something that, you know, is certainly given priority on election day, is to help triage any of those issues that are occurring. The law does not require that jurisdictions send a ballot by, you know, a braille ballot or through other means. There was actually a court decision this year that limited clerks' ability to send an electronic ballot to regular voters. So currently the law says that electronic ballots can only be sent to military and overseas voters. Regular voters and definitely confined voters are not eligible under the current law. So for there to be another option, it would require either a court decision or it would require a change by the legislature to the law.
All right, next we have a question from WAOW TV.
Hi, Megan. Thanks so much for doing this and for taking my question. I actually have two questions. My first one is, obviously, we've seen voters take advantage of early voting. So with that being said, are you guys seeing more people participate in early voting this year compared to previous elections? And could we see even more throughout this early voting deadline?
So like Reed mentioned before, I don't know that our numbers are really, it's really hard to compare this election to any other election because this is the first one where in-person absentee is in the set, first major election, I should say, where it's in the set 2-week period. Prior to this, we saw a much longer period in many of our communities. They could start in-person absentee as soon as ballots were available. So we didn't see these sort of big turnout days for in-person absentee like we're seeing now. So I don't know. If you kind of look at what's happening in other states and what's happened in some of our other elections this year, it looks like people turn out in larger numbers at the beginning of in-person absentee and then again at the end of in-person absentee. But, you know, I think our local election officials are prepared for that higher volume, prepared for seeing those spikes at the beginning and the end of the process. But also we'll see, I guess, how many turn out and how many will still turn out at the polls on election day. As we've been saying all year, I think we had to be prepared to have high turnout in all 3 methods of voting, which is very different than what Wisconsin has seen in previous presidential elections. We've always been a in-person state. We have in-person election day registration, where, you know, most voter records were created. We also had, you know, in-person election day voting, where typically 80% of our voters participated in person at the polls on election day. And so this election is different than any other. I really don't think there is any sort of comparison. But the thing we've gone into this knowing is that we have to be prepared for high turnout using all 3 options and making sure that voters know all 3 options are available to them and that they can choose whatever one is best for them, and all options will be accessible, safe, secure for them to utilize.
Awesome. And then my second question is about the recall petition.
Of the recall that indicates how many signatures they've collected. So we don't have that information to know if they have enough, if they don't have enough. We've been trying to set up a call with them to discuss the logistics of a potential filing, but we haven't received any more information. We do have a detailed manual on the recall process that's available on our website that lays out all the dates and the deadlines. But for this particular recall effort, it would require that they file at least 668 327 valid signatures with our office in order to trigger a recall.
Okay, so I guess we'll find out a little bit closer to that date then.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wish we had more information so that we could plan better, but we haven't received any more information.
Okay, thanks so much.
Next is Caroline Kenny. Caroline, are you there?
I am here. Quick question about kind of going back to what Adam was asking before. Talking about drop boxes, when do people need to finish submitting their ballots to drop boxes? Is that also 8 p.m. on election night?
So your ballot has to be returned to where it's going to be counted by 8 p.m. on election day.
Okay.
So that means in jurisdictions that might be using a drop box, they have to notice for their voters, when is the last drop off in this box where they're going to come empty it and get it to the polls by 8 p.m. So it will be before 8 p.m. So if
And
you're
do those boxes say that?
The jurisdiction should be noticing on their boxes what the last pickup is. So the law doesn't specify, what the notice for those boxes has to be, but it is certainly something that each jurisdiction needs to do. If they're going to use drop boxes, they need to be very clear with their public about when that last drop off is. And if somebody misses that last drop off opportunity, so let's say the drop box says 7 p.m. on election day is the last time that we're going to come empty this and bring it to the polls. After 7 o'clock, you're welcome to still bring this ballot to your polling place or central count facility.
Okay, so the Dropbox numbers, they'll be incorporated into that total that's published around 8 o'clock.
That's correct. Yes,
okay.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
And then quick follow-up, kind of just on a more general sphere here. What issues are you and the commission worried about going into this election? Anything like keeping you guys up at night?
We've got a pretty thick skin after this election. So I think, I'm just unbelievably proud of our local election officials and everything that they've done this year to prepare. I think they're ready. And this is a different election than we've seen before. We're not going to see this huge rush of 80% of our voters at the polls on election day. It's going to be different. It's going to be processing those absentees and running the in-person process as well. And so I think we continue to work with our local election officials and to help them prepare to answer questions and guidance. I think if anything worries me, it's changes. Seeing any changes come this close to the election. I don't see any particular ones on the horizon, but like we saw in April, that can create some really, really difficult circumstances if the rules change in the days or hours before the election. So I hope that there aren't any additional changes because I think that our local election officials are ready. They're prepared to run a great election. They're just incredible public servants. All of our local election officials are, and they're ready to serve our voters.
Thanks.
All right, next is Surin Kim.
Hi.
Surin, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you for taking this question. I just wanted to ask, how does the number of polling locations across the state fare compared to in 2016 and 2012? Have any stations closed down, and for what reason?
Yeah, so jurisdictions each make the decision about how many polling places to open every election. So the local election official, and depending on the timeline, along with their governing body, make those determinations. So every single election, the number of polling places changes. They take the best information in front of them, and they use that to notice how many polling places that they'll have. So it's not a perfect science by any means to look at the number or the locations of polling places now compared to 2016. A lot of things have happened. We've seen, consolidations of municipalities and annexations, and lots of things shift in 4 years, so that it makes it hard to compare that data. But we do see that there's a pretty comparable number of polling places, just looking at the raw numbers this year to the last presidential election. I believe for this election, there's about 2,400 polling places statewide. And in 2016, there were about 2,500 polling places statewide. So we're still very much in that same range in terms of the number of polling places, but there's lots of factors to why each of those jurisdictions, so each of those 1,850 municipalities make decisions to add or change polling places. Some of them have gone to larger facilities that serve more wards. So that's why you'll see some changes in numbers.
All right, I think it's 2 o'clock now, so thank you all for coming. You have anything else you wanted to add, Meagan?
No, thank you, everyone. I guess we'll see you again next week. And then looking ahead to Election Day, I think we plan to check in a couple of times on Election Day as well. So we're in the home stretch now. So I'm sure you all are really busy these days too. So hang in there and we'll talk to you next week.
Yep. Thanks you all for coming, and watch for an email in the next
This
hour or
program is a
so with a
nonpartisan,
link to the video.
nonprofit media
Thank you.
network with a mission to inform, educate,
Thanks.
and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. Wisconsin Eye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civic broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.